Well, let's get to tonight's presentation. Usually this is where I introduce the speakers. My name's Greg. I'm Greg Jones. We also have Sam who's also going to talk. He's our staff ecologist. He's our only paid person from BMAP. And he's very knowledgeable, so it's going to be interesting to hear what he's got to tell us on the subject also. I want to confess that I have no degree in botany, no degree in biology. Yeah. And I'm taking history. I'm actually more like an engineer. I was a land surveyor for 30 years. But I'm also taking off my, I'm president of BMAP, and I'm taking that hat off too. And I just want to talk to you guys as a fellow landowner that's had 20 years. I've owned my property for over 20 years with my wife Linda. And garlic mustard was a huge, huge problem for us. Well, when we first got there, we closed in winter. That summer, we went out to the property and the garlic mustard, I'm not kidding you, was 3 feet tall, maybe taller, solid in lots of areas in our woods. And I thought, oh man, what a disaster. But I went up and I pulled some of that garlic mustard away and I looked down and there's mayaples and geraniums, lots of them. Big, healthy, good-looking plants. So all wasn't lost. I figured I had to jump in and try to, get them some light of day or we're going to lose that too. And I've talked to this about Sam and some other people and we're not really sure what would have happened if 15 years later now, 20 years later, would there still be mayaples there, or would that have completely choked it out? I can't tell you the answer to that. But I can tell you, walking through our woods now and seeing just mayaples and geraniums all over blooming in the spring is way better than the garlic mustard. So, one of the other thing I wanted to mention was that the acres you own is not necessarily the number of acres you're going to have to target. Okay. We own 22 acres. Let's see. About 6 of those acres are in prairie and the home site and the driveway. That leaves 16, and about 10 to 12 of those acres were heavily infested, like I described, with that big 3 feet tall, dense, thick garlic mustard. And there was 4 to 6 acres that garlic mustard was present, but you could see other things. We had maidenhair ferns. You could see other things growing in amongst it. It wasn't quite that solid of an infestation. And as we've been working on our garlic mustard over the years, we have conversations with other like-minded people, like all of you in this room. And I would hear over and over, "Oh, garlic mustard. Yeah, we gave up on that. You can't keep up with that garlic mustard. We quit. We gave up." And I just hated hearing that over and over from everybody. So I thought, let's have a little talk and get this out in the open, because we've had some success, and I'd like to share that with you a little bit. So I think that's where part of where the despair, I think, comes from is it's a battle that you're never going to win. Okay? I think you can get the upper hand on it, but I don't think you're ever really going to win, because it comes back so fast. We have areas that have been cleared out, and you see a deer trail go through, and it's lined with garlic mustard in the spring. Squirrels, and Sam just told me raccoons spread it too, but it's going to come in. If you had it, you can get the upper hand, but you're not totally going to eliminate it. You've got to be vigilant on it, always, forever. Let's see, the goal is to not let it bloom, because what you want to do is exhaust that seed bank. So you're trying to never let any of that garlic mustard go to bloom in an area. And the other goal is to try to maintain all the other plants' healthy habitat at the same time. Okay? So like if you go in there, I know people that middle of summer and their garlic mustard's so bad they tell me they're going to go spray it. Oh God, don't do it in the middle of summer. Why? You got ferns, you got your maiden, everything else is there. The glyphosate doesn't care. It's going to kill what it gets onto. So it's not the best way to do it. I'm going to talk some more about glyphosate later as we get going. But yeah, nothing goes to seed. That's the big rules. When you have an area and you get it cleaned out, you check it next year for flowering plants. What you're trying to do is exhaust that seed bank that you have in there. Eventually you can get it knocked down pretty good, but what you're going to see probably is marbling at first, is what I called it, where there's, you know, where it was solid, like this room was a solid patch of garlic mustard. You might see like that table of garlic mustard, you know, spotted throughout, you know, marbling like that. And then after that, as it tapers down, you might get to where there's just plants. But how many seeds per plant, Sam? Like 10 billion gazillion seeds in each plant, okay? That's not an exact number, but it's a lot. It's a lot of seeds on each plant. So if you let one bloom, you're probably getting 1,000 seeds. So think about it, you know. That's the good. And they're not all going to germinate and all going to come, but so the more you get out, the better, but the less flowering you see, the better you're going to like your results in the end. So yeah, patrol all your working areas every year. I always use 7 years for the viability of those seeds, and I think that's up for debate too. So if you picked an area clean, you got it all out, next year it's all garlic mustard again. Well, that's the seeds. Same thing, clear it all out, next year you see it again. Eventually, what you're going to see, it's not like you exhaust the seed bank and it's gone. You're going to see it start to taper down and see this marbling come into the area. And that's when you know you're starting to get the upper hand on it a little bit. But if you get that area clean, let's talk about this. What you should do, if you, like we had, like I said, 12 acres. We couldn't go tackle 12 acres when we first started. So you want to break your property into units. And I would suggest your first unit is near the house, the driveway, where you spend time, where you see it a lot. And take it back to, you know, the top of the ditch or the big oak tree. You know, define a unit for yourself somehow with a trail and try to get that so nothing blooms in that this year. And if you can get that done, maybe try to define another unit and keep reaching out to next units. Okay? Then in subsequent years, go hit those heavy ones first, but always come back and patrol where you started, those first units. And so we're down now where our net result is, I don't think we have any big, thick infestations anymore, anywhere, but it's still everywhere. You know, all those deer trails, yeah. So it just takes that kind of vigilance to get at it. I think we're going to turn it over to Sam here, and he'll give you a little bit of the science on some of this stuff. So.
I had a
Sure.
question. When you bought your property, did you know it was there?
No.
Did you know what it was?
Yes. I knew what it was, and it took us a year or so to do it, but I don't know, the places where it was really heavy, I don't even remember why. I remember walking all the way the fence line to the back, and it wasn't that, it was there, but it wasn't as heavy back there. But I know it was after we closed on it in January. That summer is when my eyes popped out of my head when I first saw it.
And I take it nobody that had owned the property before you had done anything?
No, cut down trees and sell them to make money. That was, you know, cows and, yeah.
And your technique was, did you pull it and bag it?
I am going to talk about technique after Sam's done. I'm going to go through the whole season, what I do about it, so, yeah. And keep asking questions as we go. You can ask me questions anytime. I'm happy about it. Sam, yes, he's nodding his head too, so. That's what I said, we're not, you know, we're having a conversation here as landowners is what I hope for. And all the speakers, Sam, you're up to bat, all the speakers we have, we usually give them a hat, a BMAP hat. I've got one. I asked Sam today, do you have that BMAP hat, Sam? He said no, so thanks for presenting it.
All right, can everybody hear me all right? Mm-hmm. Perfect. Ecology is kind of a science of contact. Just a show of hands, who here has garlic mustard on their property? I own a whopping third of an acre and I also have garlic mustard. And there's like 20, 30 hands in the audience, and you probably have 20 or 30 different stories about how you manage garlic mustard and how it responds to you. I just want to give you a little bit more context to the plant that we're working with, because context is really key for what garlic mustard does on the landscape. Oh, wow. Okay, there we go. So for folks who aren't as familiar with what garlic mustard looks like throughout its entire life cycle, garlic mustard is a biennial plant, so it takes 2 years to go through its life cycle. You see some seedlings there in the second image on the left, what it looks like right as it germinates. Those really oval-shaped cotyledons. And then a more mature example for the second year growth is that growth that can get, like Greg said, up to 3-4 feet tall. And eventually, as we get towards midsummer, we have those small white flowers with 4 petals on them. That's really characteristic of Brassicaceae. That's the family that garlic mustard is in. And then by the mid-late summer, you get the seed pods, those long seed pods off of that stalk.
Sam, I have a question.
Yeah,
You just said it was a Brassicaceae?
Brassicaceae, yeah.
So it's a brassica. It's like
Brussels sprouts,
Yeah,
broccoli,
right.
mustard.
You can make pesto out of it.
it's horrible.
We'll get into that. But before, when Greg mentioned that we would talk about this, I thought how long garlic mustard might have been in Wisconsin. And I went and dug around in the Wisconsin herbarium, and I found our oldest example of garlic mustard from the state is from 1938. One L.H. Shinners in Milwaukee found an example growing at the base of a bluff on the beach under some willows, spreading extensively. So this growth form and this habit has been around for a long time. And this is what a current distribution map from iNaturalist looks like for Wisconsin. So the vast majority of the southern part of the state has really robust populations. So within, give or take, 80 or so years, this is the extent of the spread in the state. But I do want to stress that garlic mustard is a native plant in Europe. So garlic mustard actually occupies the vast majority of continental Europe and extends even into Scandinavia and out into the Eurasian steppe. That is as opposed to what it looks like in North America, where it occupies the vast majority of the northeastern states, as well as spreading into the northern part of the Midwest. So it's really an eastern state issue, although you will see populations popping up in mostly near metropolitan areas out west. A little bit of the ethnobotany of this. Somebody mentioned that you can make pesto out of it. It's actually pretty common in Europe for folks to make salads, to have spices, to have herbs, to make fish sauce out of garlic mustard. And there's actually a really long history of people eating this. Pottery fragments that have been found around continental Europe contain little mineral structures that are unique to plants called phytoliths. These phytoliths are unique to the shape of garlic mustard itself, and they find it bound to the pottery from these pottery fragments at archaeological digs. And this all manifests in about a 5,000-year history of humans consuming garlic mustard. So we've had a long history with garlic mustard, just not on this continent. And somebody mentioned they've eaten the pesto of garlic mustard. I myself have. How would you describe the flavor?
Well, I probably had a bad recipe, so.
It is more bitter.
Bitter.
How about if you have to pick it early.
Sure.
A little bit spicy, kind of.
Spicy,
Yeah.
bitter, mustardy, garlicky. There's a reason it's called garlic mustard. And the reason humans have consumed this for so long is because of the chemicals produced by garlic mustard itself. So some of these chemicals include things called glucosinolates. These are really specific to brassicas, so they're the same thing that give mustard its flavor or Brussels sprouts its flavor. But we also have other invasive species that produce these. Things like Dame's rocket also produce glucosinolates. And native plants as well are members of this group. So Cardamom concatenata is our cutleaf fork. This is also a brassicid. There are other chemicals that are in the garlic mustard itself, like glycosides or flavonoids. There's even some chemicals that are named after the genus for garlic mustard. So these chemicals are really important to the growth and the defense of garlic mustard. This is one of its strategies that people say is key to being an invasive species. Because these chemicals can act as a deterrent to herbivory, so insects and animals won't want to eat the plant. It can also act as a form of chemical warfare on close-growing plants. So it can either inhibit the growth of close-growing plants directly, or it can attack the fungi that the plants rely on. So many plants have a symbiosis with fungi in the soil. If you can knock out the fungal partner, you can affect the health of the plants growing near you. So it gives you a bit of an advantage. So these chemicals that humans have noticed for a long time are really key to the ecology of the plant. And again, any questions along the way, don't hesitate.
So Does this mean, for example, if you're a mushroom hunter, that you probably aren't going to find mushrooms near the garlic mustard infestation? I mean,
It's a good question. So there's a professor named Rick Lankow at UW-Madison. He actually studies the fungal communities in soil, and I'll talk about a little bit of his work a little bit later on in more detail, but it does affect the fungal communities. It can affect fungal abundance, but it's not a forever thing. Yeah.
In Europe, where it's been around for 5,000 years, it's more of an, obviously it's naturally present. How does it, and here it's invasive and it covers everything because it doesn't have its balance. What balances it in Europe?
So in Europe, it's still considered a weed, so it still pops up in people's gardens. It pops up along the edges of forests where there's kind of openings in the canopy. It also pops up in really disturbed sites, so the same patterns are present in Europe. But in Europe, there's a lot more documented herbivory and insect relationships. So insects have evolved that capacity to consume and digest it, as opposed to the United States. There's not as much. Good question. Any other questions? Yeah.
Will goats eat it?
You know, most large animals will not eat it. So deer really don't touch it. I'm not sure on goats though. I don't know if anybody's hired a goat team. Generally, my rule with goats is that they usually eat most everything that's bad. They also eat everything that's good. Yeah. Goats are good.
So the story I've heard on goats is the billies will eat it, the nannies won't.
Really?
I don't know whether that's true, but you can spread the rumor.
I heard it from.
Can you repeat that?
I have heard, don't wager anything at parties, but I've heard that the billies will eat it, but the nannies won't.
All depends upon how hungry any of them are.
Yeah,
They will
just leave them
probably
there longer.
eat it if they're starving.
So besides the chemical aspect to the ecology of the plant, there's other things about garlic mustard's ecology that can contribute to an invasive strategy. One of those being that biennial growth form. Multiple generations can be going at once. Every year you can have seeds reproducing and coming to adulthood. It means that there's a lot of seed production. Garlic mustard also has a really long growing season. So this figure off to the right-hand side, on the bottom, you'll see that our calendar year is progressing as you would expect. And then on the axes, at least for the colors that we'll pay attention to, are different plants and the range that they have green leaf tissue. And you'll notice the first year growth for garlic mustard spans the vast majority of the growing season. And the second year garlic mustard, as soon as that snow melts, those green leaves can start photosynthesizing and gaining carbon. And the more you're able to photosynthesize throughout a calendar year, the more carbon you can gain, the faster you can grow, the more you can produce seeds. So that extended growing season can be really important.
Why don't the leaves die back?
It's a good question. So some plants remain evergreen over time, and some plants don't. It's kind of related to the growth habit. That's kind of part of the biennial growth habit as well. But they don't form a bulb or retract below ground like an onion does.
Right.
So my guess is it's a storage issue. That's where they store their carbon. They cold hardy their leaves so they can maintain growth throughout the cold season. Likewise, like Greg mentioned, they're prolific seed producers, and they can produce seed relatively quickly. They're really well adapted to those shady forest understories and loamy soils, but they are particularly vigorous in forest gaps or forest edges. So if you're looking at your property, those are parts where the management might be a little bit more involved for a lot longer. I also mentioned the chemical warfare. Another word you'll see in the literature is allelopathy. That is kind of the nomenclature, the fancy word for that chemical production. Likewise, folks have done genetic analyses of garlic mustard in the United States, and there's so much genetic diversity within garlic mustard as a species that it points to multiple introductions across the eastern seaboard. So there's a lot of diversity even within garlic mustard. So one person's garlic mustard infestation might not be the same as another person's. And all of these things can lead to situations like this, where we see a local environment that is just absolutely dominated by the biomass of garlic mustard. And then I'm going to kind of shift and pivot into that kind of invasive species side of things. And just so we're all talking about the same thing, this is the definition in Wisconsin law of an invasive species. It's a non-indigenous species whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic, environmental harm, or harm to human health. I'll be talking about the environmental side of things as well, or for the majority of the rest of my talk, and those mostly being the effects on biodiversity, environmental effects on soil fungi or the soil microbiome, or long-term changes to the ecosystem. Yeah?
If you pick it before the seeds are viable and throw it in a pile, do they mature after you pick it?
It's one of those contentious things. If it's far enough along where I see those seed pods starting to develop, even if I see mature flowers, a lot of times I've gone and sprayed garlic mustard and you come back 2 or 3 weeks later to see how well the spraying did, and you'll see those seed pods have matured, even if they're covered with chemical. So I usually start to sweat with garlic mustard once you start seeing flowers show up. That's when I start seeing the effective chemical on actually killing the plant decreasing. And then if you're pulling, make sure that you're pulling and storing those plants in a location where you don't want mature seed, or where you do want that mature seed to drop, someplace like a pile behind your garage or where you're concentrating. But pulling and leaving a pile, those seeds might mature and just drop into the forest. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, but what I've been doing is weed whacking,
Sure.
and I don't usually pick it up, but I try to do it early on, and I didn't
Sure.
know if I was wasting my time or not.
I would start considering your cost benefit to kind of start turning away from you once those mature flowers have showed up, and once you start seeing those seed pods kind of growing and developing, they might be getting fairly close.
I would say once you see the flowers.
Yeah, that's usually when
No more, they gotta be removed at that point.
I just noticed over the years, it seems as if shorter and shorter plants start blooming.
Interesting.
And does anybody have that
Are
experience?
you whacking it at all before you see
No.
that? Okay.
No, just in places where
Okay,
it
yeah.
shows up on our neighbor's land and our land over time. It just seems like it used to be, they wouldn't flower until they were pretty tall, and now you got little guys flowering.
Yeah, I mean, I've pulled everything from 2 to 3 inches that have flowers on it.
It could be the soil where they're growing, or the light, or, yeah,
Maybe
there could
something
be
like
other
that.
factors too.
And I'll show a little bit of data a little bit later on, but populations can change over time too, right? If you've had 20, 30, 40 years, that could be 10, 15, 20 generations.
It's like the Frankenstein monster, though. It's
It can change shape. There's so many secret strategies. It's bizarre. So jumping into the effects of garlic mustard on vegetation, I'm summarizing a lot of literature, so I'll hit the main points. But we do have significant obvious evidence that garlic mustard does compete directly with native herbs and native tree seedlings. But what's really interesting is that when people have put garlic mustard head-to-head with native species in like a controlled system or a greenhouse, it doesn't always have garlic mustard being the fastest, most prolific grower. Some native plants grow faster than garlic mustard, some grow slower, but it's not like it's a freak of nature that just outcompetes. So there's something else that's going on besides just pure growth capacity. There's likewise been a lot of literature that's looked at more diverse communities with more understory herbs tends to be more resistant to invasion. And you can think about this in terms of ecological niche. Every species has its ideal type of growing condition. And if my growing condition is different than yours, we can probably coexist. We're not going to compete for resources. And in a more diverse ecosystem, we have more of that niche space or more of that environmental space occupied by flora. And it's harder for a newcomer to kind of push into that ecosystem. As opposed to a system that doesn't have much species diversity, that might have been logged or changed over time, there's more easy access into that environment. Likewise, some plants have actually shown the ability to adapt to the chemicals produced by garlic mustard, so these can change over time. And some of the species that people studied were things like jewelweed or clearweed, some of our other forest herbs. And I included some pictures of some plants that are particularly in direct competition with garlic mustard, things like large flower trillium or our spring beauties. But we don't just want to think about the vegetation, because garlic mustard has relationships with other organisms as well. So there's strong evidence that there's not much herbivory of garlic mustard by either smaller insects or by larger fauna in our ecosystems. So those chemicals that they produce seem to be working. They deter a lot of herbivory. That being said, deer browse does positively impact garlic mustard, but it's because it's avoiding the garlic mustard and eating everybody else. So they're eating those native species that are high in nitrogen, that have soft, succulent leaves. Trilliums are particularly a favorite of deer. And when those plants get eaten, it's just more space for the garlic mustard to occupy. So deer and garlic mustard can actually kind of go hand in hand. And there's some pretty strong evidence to support that. Likewise, those deer can act as a disperser of those seeds. They can stick to the fur and they can move along those deer trails, just like Greg was saying on his property. In terms of other organisms, garlic mustard, those chemicals that it produces have shown to have a negative effect on the soil fungi. So decreased richness in soil fungi in forests where we have invasions. But the good news is that when we manage garlic mustard, those fungi can recover. They can actually become diverse once more over time. But the community after is not quite the same as the community before. So different fungi move in after a garlic mustard invasion. Yeah.
So if you're managing with chemicals, will the chemicals impact on the fungi? You can talk about that at all?
That's a good question. So every herbicide that we see targeted is targeting a specific biochemical process, or like a biochemical process related to mostly carbon fixation through photosynthesis. So fungicides target the metabolism of a fungus, but herbicides are mostly targeted towards the effects on biochemistry of a plant itself, that process of photosynthesis. And fungi don't photosynthesize. That's not a no. It's just not. Does that make sense? Right? Chemicals can have all sorts of effects, right? Willy-nilly use of chemicals is not something I condone. Targeted use can be helpful. And even, like Greg alluded to before, the effects of garlic mustard over time is something that we don't have a really firm grasp on. So one thing that folks have noticed is that the spread geographically of garlic mustard has rapidly increased since the 1960s. It was fairly slow and controlled in the geographic spread, but once the 60s hit, there was a threefold increase in spread across the landscape. Whether that's humans, whether that's animals, whether that's some other type of mechanism, that's particularly interesting over time. So more areas and more places are being introduced to garlic mustard invasions. Likewise, there's some significant evidence that those diverse communities, if you are invaded, can recover quicker than those species-poor communities as well. So if you're working in a forest system that doesn't have much species richness for native flora, consider increasing that native flora as you go, although there's challenges associated with trying to introduce native species as well. Likewise, those chemicals that they can use to compete with other plants or to affect the soil fungi, those can decrease over time. This is Rick Langkow, he's that professor at UW-Madison. This is a graph showing the age of a garlic mustard infestation and the concentration of glucosinolates, or those allelopathic chemicals, over time. So the same population is producing less and less glucosinolates over time.
Do you have any clue what the mechanism of that is?
I have a friend who's a chemical ecologist, and he could talk for hours.
Okay.
But one of the factors included in that is that it's expensive to produce those chemicals. Every bit of resources you are using to make chemicals are resources you cannot use to photosynthesize or produce seeds. So there's a cost to producing chemicals. If your population is well established and well defended in this ecosystem, do we really need to have that much production of chemical defenses? Potentially not.
Maybe this relates, I have heard, and you can maybe verify, that in New England where garlic mustard has been longer, it's settled more, it's sort of more settled in the environment, it's not as threatening, it's not as overwhelming as it is here in new territories. Does that relate to the decrease over time of that chemical? Or?
Sure.
Or is that an accurate story? I don't know, first of all.
No, I'd say that's fairly accurate. The news that we get out of the Midwest is a little bit different than the news out of the Northeast.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it just highlights that just because we're calling it the same species doesn't mean it's acting the same everywhere, doesn't mean that different populations don't produce different chemical densities, or that certain strategies aren't being selected for in each environment. That was a long-winded way of saying I'm not sure.
On that same vein, I had seen an article from an Eastern ecologist that it'll burn itself out if you let it go long enough. But the damage done.
Yeah, we were talking about that a little bit down here before, where that vigor of the initial kind of pulse of plants, whether you going in and spraying or pulling things out, is just perpetuating the environment that garlic mustard enjoys.
What's the conclusion?
I would say we don't have long enough data sets. We have 50, 60 years.
Bird Blossom,
Oh, you have it right there. Glossy 2001?
2020,
2020?
December
Oh,
2020
okay.
is a review of his research.
Oh, perfect.
His conclusion is not necessarily something we want, though.
Sure.
I don't know if I should mention this now.
Sure.
Okay.
By all means.
So I met him, I was a board member of IPAW, and he came and talked to us at, I guess, one of the weeds conferences, or several of the weeds conferences. Anyhow, he did research, long-term research on plots all over the northeast part of the state, into the Midwest, but not, I don't think it was quite into Wisconsin. And the longer residence time of the garlic mustard patches, these were garlic mustard areas that were not being treated, the longer that they were there, present on the site, the more decrease they saw in the population. So over time, they decreased. And I don't know what the mechanism is in the soil, but I know that when they heated up the soil, they could grow garlic mustard seeds, but if they left it, no, they could, but if they left it intact, they could not grow garlic mustard seeds. So there's something in the soil chemistry, microorganisms in the soil, they believe that were actually acting upon the seeds to prevent their germination. So they would see, they had plots that, he said they had things like trilliums that had been wiped out, and then all of a sudden the garlic mustard gone and the trilliums were back. Like,
interesting.
Full complement of spring ephemerals and native plants that had been eliminated. If you're trying to maintain a native population, a diverse population of plants, are you going to just want to sit there and wait? And his recommendation is, if you don't, you're going to be working against this mechanism that will eventually wipe out this plant.
Right.
So,
Very interesting.
How many years?
No, I'd be interested to.
Does it wipe it out?
well, what they found was they had plots, and they were using, it was a typical kind of research project. And, they might have a plot on a hilltop, and the garlic mustard may be spreading downhill outside of the plot area, but it's completely eliminated from the area on the hilltop. So it might have been moving around a little bit, but the data really, showed significant decline. And then they were also able to isolate it and say, there's something in the soil that is preventing these seeds from even germinating.
Sure.
So,
What was the length of that study?
oh gosh,
How many years?
I don't know.
How many decades? Why doesn't it happen in Europe?
They're talking about population declines and just looking at some of this stuff. I didn't really read all of it. They were talking about, like 12, 13 years, but what he's talking about is this species arrived here in the Northeast, on the coastal areas, much sooner than it did in Wisconsin.
1860s, 1870s.
Okay,
around.
so it's had that much more time for that, whatever that is, to work on the plants.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see that.
But also, based upon what you were saying, not every garlic mustard plant is the same. It's got a slightly different genetic basis, and the context within which it's growing, and the soil and the fungi that are there. I don't see how you can totally extrapolate one study or even over several years. I'm certainly not willing to, let my place go. Thinking,
Yeah.
oh, well.
Yeah.
That's kind of where the literature is at right now, too. so many people are studying very small kind of populations of a
Yeah.
few sites, and how we really need to bring a more comprehensive geographical perspective.
Well, the other thing I think Pat said was eventually they saw population decline, not elimination. So that, I mean, someone said East Coast, so it's still growing, it's still there, but it's not that robust, big, dense
Right.
patch.
Did you say that something happened when they heated up the soil or didn't heat up the soil?
Yeah, when they,
So is that like a fire?
when they heated up the soil, like killed the microorganisms in the soil, they were able to actually get the seeds to germinate. When they took the soil straight out of the forest and tried to grow them, they would not grow. So it was something they were killing in the heating process, was the deterrent to having the seeds germinate.
They sterilized the soil.
Yeah, exactly.
If
Yeah.
you heated up the soil, you had more seeds germinate
Right,
of the garlic mustard.
right.
So we shouldn't burn.
Well, you don't get the soil that hot. And you don't get the soil that hot and burns.
No, it's like, it's superheated. I mean, you're killing a lot of other stuff in the soil too, all sorts of microorganisms and bacteria. But, yeah, from what I remember of his maps, they actually showed a movement of this decline happening from the east to the west. And the really sad thing was, it wasn't in Wisconsin, it's not in Minnesota, maybe Indiana, it's happening. I don't even know about Illinois, but it's like, do we want to really wait and let it go? Hope that in another 20 years it may be.
The unfortunate part is, I know for sure there's plenty of acres that are not getting managed well worth thinking about. There's plenty of control.
Bert Blessy recommends that those areas that we know we're not going to manage, we should be doing research on.
Absolutely.
Just to monitor that site to see if that actually happens there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
I have a question about the figure here.
Yeah.
Now, so the concentration of the glucose in the lakes, is that in soil or is it in plant?
The plant tissue.
That's in the plant tissue.
So, you're describing this decline, and I heard somebody say, so why isn't that happening in Europe? It may be happening in Europe, because that's about, when you see it native, it's really, so the one time I've seen it native, there were 4 plants on a creek bed.
Sure.
That was it. And so maybe that's exactly what has happened in Europe.
Okay.
Yeah, I will note that we've also have documentation of pollinators going and visiting and actually pollinating garlic mustard. So a few species of butterfly actually go and visit species native to North America. So ecology is always a dynamic system. You can never put a pin and say that that's the tried and true fact. But systems are that. Systems are dynamic. So it makes ecology such a frustrating and fun science. So for the sake of time, I don't know if my clicker's working anymore. That's all right. I'll just use this. In terms of garlic mustard management, at least in Wisconsin, we do know that management does have a significant impact on perpetuating populations of native species while addressing ongoing establishment of garlic mustard. Like Greg said, I don't think eradication should be your goal. I think management to create space for native flora is really the goal. So when you can see mayaples, geraniums, trilliums, spring beauties, Dutchman's brooches, all of those woodland flora, that's what we're really aiming for. But your two main schools of management are going to be physical or chemical. I'm not going to take too much of Greg's thunder, but most of your efforts should be focused on May and early June. This is a really prime time to be targeting the plant. Once you get to mid to late summer, you've kind of missed your window for this year's plants. You should focus your attention elsewhere. And again, if you are using methods, you should typically use about 5 years, 7 years. Give yourself a little bit of time to actually get your hands around the population, because that seed bank can be really robust. And then in terms of looking for resources to manage garlic mustard, Mark Renz at UW-Madison works with UW Extension to produce weed fact sheets. They study different methods of control and eradication for these species, and they go into pretty nice detail about how to prepare your applications and when to go about them. So if you're interested in controlling garlic mustard on your property and looking for resources, Mark Renz, R-E-N-Z, writes these weed fact sheets that are fairly nice resources. Yeah.
I would also add that if, not just garlic mustard, but any kind of weed that you're trying to control, the Midwest Invasive Plant Network is a database for people to just, a lot of this is, people's experience. It's not necessarily researched, but you can look up any species of plant that is an invasive plant, I think most species, that you want to control, and look at different methods that people have used. And it'll tell you how effective the treatment is in initially, like in the season, and then a year after treatment. So it's really a very helpful way to look at the different methods that have been used and how effective they are.
Yeah, absolutely. I know people who print them out and have a little binder in their work truck or their UTV, just so you can flip through on a regular basis. They're really nice resources, and literally for dozens of invasive species. So it's pretty awesome.
Speaking of resources, I meant to say when I don't have any credentials, that how I learn stuff is out of reading books and internet. I don't know if you guys use this book. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. I'll pass it around. Guess what the cover picture is? But it's not just garlic mustard, but it's a wealth of information in that book.
What's the name of the book?
Invasive Plants of the Upper Midwest.
It's a good one.
I got it.
And we would find newer days like hedge parsley. We never dealt with that. You go to the book and it's there. And it's a lot. It's a good one. It tells you what chemicals work and that kind.
Great. So for the sake of time, to give Greg some more time to talk, I just wanted to summarize that garlic mustard has a lot of strategies that make it really well adapted to take over forest systems. But the drivers of what makes them really more abundant or less abundant aren't as clear. Different things are impacting different systems. And even more so, those effects over time aren't very clear. Like you mentioned with Glossy's paper, those effects over time are fairly ambiguous. We haven't had the time to study it. That being said, we do know that direct management and intervention can create that space that can at least allow native species to persist. So I recommend that management is a good, effective way to kind of control that garlic mustard. But it takes about 3 to 5 years at a minimum to really get active control. And then I'll end with this, my portion with this little illustration from a writing by Anderson in 2023, wondering whether it's garlic mustard being a really well-adapted organism that's driving it to be an invasive species, or whether there are other landscape factors, other fauna, other human activities that are creating the space for garlic mustard to take over these systems. So it's a fine distinction, but it's one that we should think about with our management. And speaking of management, I'm going to turn it over to Greg for the rest of the talk. Greg, if you need me to flip through any images for you, just let me know.
That one I sent you, I'll ask for that when the time comes. So I'm just going to kind of walk through the year and how we did things. I didn't like that what you said, May to June on that slide. I'm going to say April to June, okay? But you go out there and it really is the first thing that you see that's green out there, okay? Now, if this room was just covered with it in the spring that early, BMAP does not, I don't want to, poisons are poisons, okay? BMAP, I guess, if you're going to manage a lot of acres of this stuff, you're going to have to get into chemicals eventually. So I've been an organic gardener my whole life, and I resisted like hell, and to get this garlic mustard under control, I just had to use it. So anyway, that spring, that was an ideal time when you see that. Why? Once you start seeing fiddleheads and stuff, now you got other collateral damages, but this stuff is up even before the fiddleheads and everything else. So you can go out there and you can spray it that time of year and do pretty well with it. So very little collateral damage that time of year. Another method I've done that time of year is I call it the blowtorch. I have a flamethrower. I've got a picture of it. We couldn't quite get it into the computer. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. It's a wand about this big. I think it's like 40,000 BTUs come out of it. It really throws some heat. And you hook it to a 20-pound tank. And I've got a backpack frame I've rigged that can go on. And Now, it's good in the spring because spring, a lot of times that leaf litter is wet, okay? You're not gonna set the woods on fire. But I've tried doing it in the fall, and you're spending too much time going putting out fires everywhere. It's no good. But in the spring, I had a lot of success with that, especially walking our trails, because the deers use our trails, and we see it on the edge of the trails. So as you walk along, you can just walk along hitting them with the thing. Now, a big plant, when they get big, you spend so much time with the heat on it, it's not worth it anymore. But the little plants you can, and I've had people say, well, don't they just grow back again? No. You hit it with that thing long enough and its roots and everything, it's gone. You've gotten rid of it. And yeah, there was 2 or 3 years where I think I went through 2-3 tanks of gas a day. I was having such good success with it. And I kept doing it until they got big enough. And then I realized I'm spending so much time to wilt that thing down, I could just, done. Yeah, so anyway, it's good in the beginning when they're little like that. We've run fire through our woods. That's a bit of a double-edged sword. We ran fire through our woods early spring. It's all black. And we saw garlic mustard pop up after that like we've never seen. It was unbelievable how it stimulates it to germinate, I think. Okay, go ahead and germinate. If we can stop from any more seeds getting in there, we're starting to exhaust that seed bank even faster. So bring it on. Yeah, let's
Can I
have
say
it.
something to that?
Go for it.
I've done a few burns where if that current first year of germination has occurred and they're all about 1 inch or 2 tall, running a fire through can kill them.
Yes, yes.
It can be really effective.
Yes.
Those rosettes that are in their second year, they'll still survive.
Yeah.
So it's all about time.
I think we were too early with both of our burns. Well, actually, I think 3 years we ran fire through it. And we found the same thing every year. It was real early when we did it. And okay, so now we've gotten to the time of year where, where's that? Do you have that slide of that first seed? So now, oh, the other one was weed whacking. Good time of year. Now they're getting taller, and we got to go weed whack them, and that's good. But you want to, and I have 2 kinds of weed whackers. I have a little electric one that's pretty nice when they're really small and little, and you can get down to the ground with that. And a battery is just about as long as you want to do it anyways. When they get bigger, they're like this before they bloom. I've got a bigger one, a gas-powered one that they pollute like hell, but it's really effective. And they've got really stiff, not a string, but stiff plastics that come out. Now, what you want to do, though, is get that real low to the ground. The lower to the ground you can whack that, the better you're going to do. Because if you whack it too high above the ground, it's going to resprout. Now, all is not lost when it's resprout, because when it grows by itself, garlic mustard will look, you know, like this many stems coming up. You know, you'll see it one this big around you. You can't believe it sometimes. That whole thing comes out with one pull. After you whack it, when it comes back, it's much less of a plant. It's weaker, it's shorter, and it blooms quicker. So even if it does come back, you still, instead of 10,000 seeds per plant, you got 2,000. So, you know, so you've done something in this. So, excuse me. I knew I was going to do this talk last spring, and I'm out whacking the garlic mustard, and I came across one that looked like this. These were the very first seed pods coming out. They come out right on the top like that. When you see that, go hang your weed whacker up. You're done, because you got to get that stuff out of there. You got to remove them. You just have to do it. So you're down to hand pulling at this point for the rest of the summer. Not the rest of the summer. You're down to hand pulling for a while. We would make piles in the woods. If we were close to one of the trails, I mean, you could get a bundle about this big and go throw it on the trail, or we could drive a tractor and pick it up later. Otherwise, a stump, a log, if you're deeper in the woods, we'd make piles, great big piles on them. Then we'd come in with tarps and drag that out. We took them all, we have a burn pile. We take all that to a burn pile, and that's another picture I should have brought. It's a little, but Linda's standing next to her seed, her garlic mustard seed, plant pile, and it's taller than she was. It was enormous. Now, I say it's a little deceptive because I think there was stuff under that pile before I started throwing stuff on it, so it would be a little bit of a lie.
Does pulling that loosens the soil, does that create a more fertile ground for seeds to
Yes,
sprout?
it does. Yes, yes. And Linda talks about that all the time. Every time she pulls it, we're exposing new seeds, and now it's just going to start. Okay, but there's a seed bank. Every day another withdrawal. So I think that's what you want to do. You want all of those seeds to germinate, so. But,
Hey, Greg,
yeah.
sometimes I'll use a chopper if it gets like that, just a trimmer.
Yeah.
And then but the plant still survives, but you can chop off.
Well, it'll resprout.
It'll resprout, okay,
Yeah.
so that's kind of not really.
And if it's got the seed pods on it, you got to get them out. You got to pick it up. Yeah, because they will mature, like you said. They will mature. I know they will. Seeds ripen after removal. Oh, and then those piles that we get eventually to the big pile. I had the picture of Linda. That gets burned. So we put wood on it, and that all gets burned in the end. So that's how we deal with that. As soon as you see them get out, so you got to pull the rest of the year. Now it's summer. We're hand pulling. We see these seed pods, they're green. We're pulling as much as we can. This is a big push to pull. Linda will pull 4 hours a day. I don't know how else she does it. She drags me out for an hour or two and I whine about it. But, so now, when you brush against the plant, now it's getting to be mid to late summer. You brush against the plant. Have you ever heard those seeds rain out?
Yes.
Once you hear that, go watch TV. I don't know what you can do then. There's nothing you can do. Because if you touch them, if you try to remove them, you're just spreading them. If you chop them, I mean, the seeds are there. It's too late. The damage is done. So, yeah, long tap root. Keep looking for those stragglers, so you can do that too. If you see some stragglers, maybe you can go grab that and, even though it's raining seeds, you can get some of that out. If I had all this and I had 2 plants in the middle, even though the seeds were raining down, I would still want to get as much out of that as I could. But a big area, no.
You mentioned the taproot. I have pulled them and they've broken off. And I've tried to dig down further and pull up, just with my hands.
I don't think they germinate from that low taproot.
They won't come back?
I think if you get it below the soil, even an inch or 2, I think you've got it.
Okay, good, because I've had 4 hand surgeries, so I don't want anyone.
Yeah.
If you are hand pulling, if you can wait for a gentle rain the day before,
Yeah.
it just makes everything so much easier.
Right, that rock hard soil. Yeah.
And this is also a good time to look for those stragglers because it's blooming. So when I go into an area, they're showing themselves a lot better. So that's a good time to go patrol your areas that you've already pretty much have cleaned up. Okay, so now it's fall. I would say mid-fall, you're going to see a bunch of the little, about this tall. And the first time I saw that, I had to pick my jaw up off the floor and put my eyes back in because it was just like a green carpet. It was unbelievable. Now you're getting to a good time to use that glyphosate again. But I would always have waited for a killing frost first. Why? Because there goes your May apples are pretty much done by then anyway, but your ferns and everything else goes to sleep for the winter because your glyphosate goes through the leaf and it's the photosynthesis, I guess, really that makes the kill on it. So you're that late in the fall. What you need though, I always use the rule 50 degrees and rising. It's probably because I was around concrete a lot. I've had people say glyphosate work at 40 degrees. I don't know. I like 50 and rising. So there's only a day or two, you get that killing frost, you're only going to find a day or 2 that it works, but look for that day. If you can find that day. And the other thing I've done is I heat my water that I put it next to glyphosate with. Because I just picture that little plant, on that cold day, and it opens in the pores and takes a big drink. Sorry. So, yeah, you could try weed whacking, I think, in the fall. I don't know if that would come back or not, though. Those little short plants, I don't know if weed whacking those. You could try it. I don't know if they'll come back from that or not. They might. Because that's a young, really strong, healthy plant. It's ready to go dormant for the winter anyway, so, the flamethrower could work that time of year. I think you could flamethrow them because you can kill that root deep enough. Get rid of them. I've done some fall flame throwing too. I wish I could show you. If anybody wants to see that picture, what that flamethrower setup looks like, I got it on my phone here. I can show you afterwards.
I have a question. So that is the first year growth?
Yes, in the fall.
And then is that plant gonna totally die in the winter and re-sprout, or does it stay green?
It can stay green.
Or and then, like, does it have to regrow, or does it tend to be?
Is it herbaceous? Does it die down to the ground?
Does it stay at that height?
It stays close to the ground, but then it'll shoot up that big long stalk.
Okay.
It'll form what's called kind of a rosette that first year. That's kind of that growth form. It's low, it's accumulating carbon, and then staying into the fall, it can just photosynthesize until there's snow on top. Stay close to the ground like that.
I think the question is, do the leaves in that rosette
Yeah.
die, or do they make it through the
In
winter?
February, if I cleared the snow, what would I see them? Green?
You know, I haven't gone.
Yeah,
I would be a bit surprised. I would, because I've seen them in bitter cold weather where they're.
you can go dig them out of the snow and they're green.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. You know, my daughter is I gotta use the right word. I always say scavenger, that's not right. She's a forager. She's a forager. She loves to forage. Sorry, Bill's here too, isn't he? Sorry, Joe. But she came to me when we were first fighting and she says, Dad, you know, you can make pesto out of that. It's really good. I think maybe she made it, I tried it once, but it was, I just consider it fraternizing with the enemy. I don't like it. Nothing to do with it. So I say no. Plus I grow lots of basil. We've got pesto in the freezer forever. So yeah, it's not on my dining table anyways.
Question here.
How about using glyphosate instead of glyphosate?
That's a very good possibility. I don't know.
Could you repeat the question?
Before we started tonight.
Could you repeat the question?
Using triple 4 instead of,
So,
what about, can you compare them at all?
They're both fairly effective. We used mostly glyphosate herbicide when I was doing a lot more restoration. But if you look at that Mark Ren's sheet, they have similar effectiveness rates. And they're applied at similar concentrations and similar rates.
The triple 4 you can use at lower temperature, I think, can you?
Yeah, potentially.
Well, that would be very handy for the fall.
Yeah.
so we use a mix of glyphosate and Garlon. And the Garlon, so if you hit that with Garlon, if you hit it on the flowers, it'll stop it. And so the idea is to have the Garlon in there to stop it right now. And then the glyphosate will kill it over time.
Get the roots.
Yeah. But that way you can spray this if you've got a bit of Garlon in there, and it'll stop it. You won't
stop the seeds either.
Yeah.
right away. Right away.
Another thing, go ahead, Pat, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I just looked it up on the MIPN website, on the invasive plant database, and it looked like they were both fairly effective in season, but the only 1 star of effectiveness in the year after treatment for both of them. So I don't know what that really means. If that means that it's the plant recovers, or if they're saying that you're not killing all of the plants. You know, it could be like you don't see all the plants, you're not spraying them all, so you're not killing them all.
Yeah.
It could be, seed bank, or, who knows.
Keep in mind with biennial plants too, you have two generations always working, and you're only hitting half of those adult plants.
Yeah.
And plus a seed bank.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this doesn't say like long-term effectiveness.
Yeah.
If you do it, I mean, what would be helpful is how many years treating plots with like research that shows what works effectively. I think we're kind of doing the research.
Yeah.
So I think this database, it would be really helpful if people are entering their methods and their effectiveness. It's just kind of like, what you feel like the effectiveness is. You're making a judgment decision about how effective it is.
Did you look in that book? That might have said something about different chemicals too. So we can look it up later. But the other thing I found one year, I sprayed in the fall, and I was so pleased. And I went out in the spring and looked, and it's like I was never there. What went wrong? Well, I finally figured out, I think it was because I did not use a surfactant. You know what I'm talking about? Like methylated soybean oil. Add that to your, really helps a lot because it sticks to the plant better. So I must have sprayed it on. Maybe there was a dew or a rain, or it just didn't take. I didn't go. It just rolled off the leaf or whatever. But use a surfactant with it. That really helped a lot. I never found that again. The other, what I did find was, this is a down tree with branches sticking out all over. And I go the next year after I sprayed, and the following spring, under all those branches, plenty of garlic. You know, you can see where you, oh yeah, I didn't get under there, but you know, you can see, or maybe there's a strip where I missed or something. But that told me it was effective, because I saw every place else it was gone, but not there.
Hey, another hint is make sure you use plenty of dye.
Yeah.
So you can see.
Yeah, where you've been. Yeah, and you need some good dye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you put plenty strong enough.
Yeah, because I got just food coloring out of the grocery store.
No.
To see that.
Herbicide dyes.
Yes. Yeah, no, I remember, there's, yeah, anyways, that's a long story. Another one is we walk around after dinner sometimes on our trails, and you see garlic mustard. Oh, there's one plant got away from us. You pull that, you pull another one, you got 4 or 5 in your hand, you walk, you got another hour or so you want to walk. What I do is I rip those seed heads away from the plant, and we drop it on the trail. Because those seeds are going to develop, right? Well, they got to get energy from somewhere. So I'm going to separate those seeds from the roots, the stem, the leaves, everything I can, you know, and rip that top off. And I put it on the trail because if they germinate on the trail, they haven't got a chance, because we're walking and mowing and the trail's gone. So, you know, if you just have a half a dozen, that's my method of taking care of those.
I stick them in my pocket and then forget when I wash my teeth.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we got through the fall, and now it's winter, and the only thing I wrote down was it's a good time to go burn your pile of plants that has all the seeds in it, and enjoy some of your other hobbies in life. Get ready to plant your garden and stuff. So winter, there's not much you can do. It's so.
That's a blessing. It's nice to have time off.
Absolutely. Isn't it wonderful having change of seasons? I love it, yeah. So, the only other thing I had come across was wild ginger supposedly can kick some garlic mustard in the butt and get rid of it. But, you know, you're just not going to fight 12 acres of solid garlic mustard by planting wild ginger. You know, it might be something nice to introduce to you to help keep it down later, but I don't know if there's any other plants that can do that, help you that way. It's like the big one for Canada goldenrod was wood betony. Put wood betony in, it's supposed to creep through and knock down some of your goldenrod. And I've tried it, but you got to be very patient, and it takes some time. Yeah. So, will anybody have any other questions for either Sam or myself? Bill.
Yeah, I'm Greg's neighbor. I live in the land. I got land, lots of garlic mustard, and I just want to invite us to just stand back 50,000 feet. Humans are always making war on nature. We're always, 100 years ago it was coyotes, coyotes. And on some level, there are no invasive species in Wisconsin. They're all on planet Earth. And for millennia, species are constantly moving around and shifting their distributions. And you know, I don't know any answers here. But given that, you know, apparently some native plants can develop resistance to the allelopathy. Nothing is known about the long-term responses to the communities of garlic mustard. My brain just goes to, what if you just turn to acceptance? Just let it go. And instead of spending hundreds of hours pouring it all, read some poetry, write to your representatives about making real change that can help this planet. You know, I'm not advocating it, but you know, we don't know. And where my brain goes, it sounds a little bit analogous. Studies have shown that if you give kids yourself medicine to reduce the fever when you have the flu, it takes you 2 to 3 days longer to get over the flu because you're interfering with your body's holistic response to the flu. You know, are we slowing down the native environment's ability to develop a response to garlic mustard by constantly spraying with poisons and cutting and rooting it up? We don't know. If we didn't touch garlic mustard, what would the woods look like 50 years from now?
Well, we're gonna find out because there's thousands of acres that aren't being treated, so.
I'm not saying that, it's something to think about.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying though, I get it, but there's a lot of answers to that, and I had a lot of the same questions at the beginning too, and you know, they always talk about they want your prairie back to pre-settlement times. And I say, well, pre-settlement, I mean, weren't things moving around all the time? The answer is no.
5 acres.
The answer is no. The plant communities were stable. It was 10,000 years. There wasn't big changes. The plants were diverse and mixed, and it was very stable and did not move a lot. When the ones came from Europe, they dominated, and it kind of, like our woods, all I saw was garlic mustard. Now I see a carpet of wild geraniums and the mayapple. But you're right, I cut down a whole bunch of box elder trees in our woods. One place was almost denuded of all trees because it was almost all box elder. I got them all out, and I put in sugar maples because that's the last succession that comes up in the forest. And when it was box elder, and that's a native species, it was dark in there. It was just dark. It was just claustrophobic almost. Well, guess what it looks like with all those sugar maples? All I do is trade species, really.
But you can.
I'll just say, you know, I don't.
Yeah, right. I got something I like a lot better.
I don't know the answer. Again, I live right down the road from Greg, and I don't think anybody's touched the woods I live on for years.
No.
My woods are full of mayaples and ferns. Yeah, I don't know if they will be 20 years from now, but you know,
well,
I was going out ripping up garlic mustard. You know, I did it for about an hour and a half, and I just thought, screw this. And here's the thing. I felt so angry at this garlic mustard. You want to have a look at the most damaging invasive species of North America? Look in the mirror.
Yeah.
Let's put put ourselves up in the room. Start there. You know? Anyway, I decided. I'm just going to relax, let my woods figure out. I'm not spending half my life freaking pulling up something that humans label as an invasive species, but to my mind really isn't.
Well, I see why it's invasive.
America's is part of,
and also it's not half my life. I spent probably 10 years working pretty freaking hard at it. And now we're in a place where it's, like I said, we're maintaining it.
Yeah, well, and I also want to add, I'm a beneficiary of his work. I drive by the beautiful prairies. I get to enjoy all the work he and Lyndon put in. I get to walk their woods, and I think, yeah, this looks like a hell of a lot better than my red. I'm actually a beneficiary of all of their work.
I'd like to address your comment. I've spent, probably 50 years biking the areas all around western Dane County and Iowa County. And when I first started biking, there were native plants along the roadsides all up and down this area. And the last few years, it's rare. You used to see remnants of prairie communities and native plants, and they're all gone, and all you see is either cultivated fields or invasive species. And that's, and I think the point of the people made was there's plenty of opportunities for people to watch the natural evolution of our world the way we have now. And it's going to happen. What we're doing is just running a little plant museum things in the area.
Well, I even say my prairie's so small. I have a 2 acre, but 2 prairie areas are about 2 acres. And it's almost, I call it a prairie garden actually. Because it's really, a real prairie, like, you need at least 40 acres, I think, before you get the birds and all the real habitat of the prairie. So I even call that just a prairie garden. That's kind of what we're doing.
So, Greg, I live in the neighborhood too.
Yeah.
And many of us do. So we cannot manage our 67 acres, not all of it.
Right.
But what I have found is that very early in spring, the queen bumblebees are out, for example. And I really, and we have some orchids. And the deer love the orchids. And so I've come to choosing certain areas. And I also, to Bill's point, I think if we're going to be out there doing something in nature, then we can do it joyfully. When I'm out there pulling garlic mustard, I see nesting birds that I would never ever see. And you know, there's a joy about it, and I actually do eat a lot of garlic mustard too. So, you know, I think if we're going to do this work, and I am doing it, I cannot manage, and it's hard to see some of the really precious plants being crowded out. But, so there are areas, and I've actually had to cage some of the areas too and keep the deer out. But I think it's all how are we going into the woods? Can we bring that joy? Can we bring a love of this earth? And I think that's possible. And we know that we're, you know, hopefully we can at some point in the future be like Europe, where it's all coexisting, you know? So that's my approach, and I'm actually really benefiting from tonight because I want to go into the woods and I want to be connected with it. And I know that some of the natural things are out of balance, so maybe we can help bring a little balance back.
Yeah. I'd touch on one thing you said, 67 acres, I get it. I mean, I have 22, and you know, there's, like I said, only 10 or 12 of them was really bad. But, so that's when it's like, make units for yourselves. Try to get that around your house, like, you know, to the edge of the gully or the big oak tree up there or whatever. Nothing blooms here. And then, you know, try to just keep branching it out. But the units way in the back, just maybe walk and look at it, but, you know, that you can't do that. You can't do it all. Yeah. And that love of being in the woods, that lady right there, Linda, oh my gosh, she goes out in the rain and pulls the garlic mustard. She loves it so
Sarah
much.
and I were talking about the same thing you were just saying, and what Bill's saying too, is, I mean, we are still interested in getting rid of our garlic mustard because we like all the other plants we see when we're out in the woods pulling the garlic mustard. And that's what Sarah and I were saying, you know, your face is basically pointing at the earth, and you're pulling garlic mustard and you're seeing little young plants growing, and you're seeing all kinds of things, and you're hearing the birds, and then you're watching the birds, and you're just out and you're completely immersed in the environment. And, you know, I'm out there because I'm pulling garlic mustard, but mostly garlic mustard is a good excuse for me to be out in the woods all day.
That's what I meant.
And every year, it changes every year.
It'll be a win-win, I can see this going.
I can't do these dishes right now, I've got to be outside.
We'll see you tomorrow.
I appreciate the like philosophical discussion in this too. And I was just thinking, like maybe as we're like pulling the mustard out, it doesn't seem bad to like maybe plant like a plant, like in its place or something. I don't know. Like if you're spending time pulling, maybe you pick an area that you actually plant like a larger planted.
I gotta get home and pull some mustard in my flashlight.
Just a thought.
Yeah, with a lot of acreage, yeah, I intercede is what I do. I've done a lot. We've interceded in our woods with certain plants, like bottle brush. We're starting to have great luck with our bottle brush. But it's not, yeah. But I don't know if you caught what I was saying about what Linda said, noticing the plants, and as you're pulling underneath, every year it changes. And as we went through this, we'd see more and different plants, and every once in a while you come in and, oh, look, guess what I found today in the woods, you know, and there's more. Just like the prairies, when you establish your prairie, the first year you get the yellow cones and the Canada rye, and, you know, as years go by, you start to get more and more surprises every year as it happens. So it's, that's what you get pulling the mustard too, I guess.
Here's another question about, it seems like when I go out and patrol the property, I see a lot of dispersal of the garlic mustard along deer trails, and deer, and you see them jump over a brush pile, and there's the plants, and there's squirrels and stuff that go up in the trees and stuff, but mostly deer. And so, any thoughts about deer management as part of garlic mustard control?
Yeah, there's a paper by John Waller's, an old professor out of UW-Madison, who did a lot of work on deer and plant communities, and he advocated for deer management or vegetative management.
It's just so important to control deer, to control deer garlic mustard.
I always think if you don't hunt on your property, there's somebody nearby you who would love to do
Or you get a little black dog.
Yeah, or
He's really good at it, man. We caught 4 sneaking up to the bird feeder the other day. They didn't even make it to the feeder before.
Well, I don't know how it is for everybody else, but the deer herd is going through the roof around us now. The numbers are huge compared to what they have been. They're just increasing all the time.
And we're particularly in a pretty CWD heavy area.
Yes.
Like
It's not heavy.
other hunters know the numbers better than I do, but like a solid 30 to 40% of deer test positive in a few places around here.
Yeah.
And they do know that deer that test positive for CWD do not move geographically nearly as much as a deer that's not infected. So if you have deer that are infected, they tend to stay in an area for a long time, eating your vegetation.
Well, we're tending to see now, 10 here, 10 there, 10 here. I may go home tonight and see 40 deer before we get to our house, kind of thing. It's amazing. Everybody in the neighborhood is kind of saying the same thing.
Yeah, I'm a strong advocate. Getting a hunter on your property is a good thing.
Probably got time for 1 or 2 more topics, and anybody wants to bring something up, otherwise, go ahead.
I wanted to bring up glyphosate because I do have concerns about spreading so much poisons. Our neighbor hires a professional group that come in, and I think they spray a little late, but they spray huge areas. And I know it's supposed to break down quickly, they say.
Well, that's what the company says, so.
Okay, well, this is the thing. Are other people having the experience that it's a dead zone? And I have personally used it on poison ivy to spot places. And then I'll get quite an area where there's nothing then, even beyond where the poison ivy was. And I'm cautious, and these areas that our neighbor's done, it's like they're huge areas and they've sprayed them. And you can just see not much of anything's coming up.
They come out with the ATVs and they have the big guns that shoot, 20 feet away.
Oh, my Lord. Yeah, that's.
And so there's
And
just
they're
nothing
doing other
wrong
plants
there.
over. I am worried about moss, like the moss on the log behind where you're spraying,
Forget that.
Yeah.
There is a lot of drift.
So are other people having that sort of experience?
I guess I haven't experienced that bad, but
I would rather not.
no, I would rather not do. I would also tell you this, and I meant to bring this up, that the results that we got, I have not mixed glyphosate. We used it, it was 2 or 3 times that the backpack holds 3 gallons, I mixed 3 batches, so I sprayed 9 gallons of glyphosate in an afternoon. I don't think I have mixed a gallon in 2 or 3 years. Because you get to that's when it's solid, packed in, and you just nothing else you can do. We're to the point with ours that we don't use it anymore. We use it to paint stumps and things like that, but that's about it. I don't spray garlic mustard anymore at all. Yeah. So that was, it's just a lie or to comfort myself. Like the farmer spraying glyphosate every year on the field, every year, over and over and over. There's no end to it. He grows crops, he's spraying it. There's an end to it with if you can get the weeds under control, you don't have to use it anymore.
Garlic mustard is my least favorite thing to spray. There tends to be a lot of collateral damage with it.
Okay.
Just because of the way it grows and how much you need to apply to each plant to get an effective kill.
But that's why I like that super early spring or very late fall.
If you can get it when
because
it's
everything
low.
else is gone. Yeah. And that's the only time I've ever used it.
Like Greg said, it's sometimes like a triage situation. Nobody loves to triage. Like it means that there's going to be damage.
Yeah.
But if it can be 3 to 5 years of use, as opposed to a little here, a little there for the foreseeable future. I have personally worked with landowners who have been hand pulling garlic mustard on their property for north of 25 years. And quite literally in tears because they have not made any progress.
Oh, wow.
And that is their kind of path that they chose. But I do know most land managers who spend a lot of time on properties for a long time do fall into the camp of 3 to 5 years of fairly aggressive chemicals.
And there's collateral damage with other too, the weed whacking. I mean, you're so careful trying to get in around that mayapple or and bam, you nicked one down. Or even pulling. What are you stepping on?
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably not so bad. But everything has its. You just got. That's why I said there's 2 goals: to protect everything that's there and to eliminate the garlic mustard.
Yeah. The more you know, the good plants in the area to avoid, the better. And avoiding the really vulnerable spring ephemeral populations. If you have spring beauties on your property, let them sit for a couple weeks, they nest.
Is the glyphosate any more effective on the first-year plants or the second-year plants, or is it equally effective?
In my experience, a lot of your spraying is you're going for those second-year plants before they seed. But if there's like a fairly robust, the first-year plants, they'll form kind of like a bulb about this big. You can get herbicide on them.
I like the fall. I think I had the most success in the fall. I think in the spring, by the time they're, I don't know. I did some spring spraying with the glyphosate, but by the time you stop, it seems like there's more coming up, and it's just, I don't know. I think I like the fall a little better. And those are the little plants.
It's very effective on the cotyledons of the things. It's, if you get the dead patch, but you get them, and then the next year you don't have to be messing with it. So we spray the first years, and sometimes it's kind of carpet spraying, but you only have to do that for 2 or maybe 3 years.
Right. Yeah. I've had mentors of mine are liking it to chemotherapy. Like, you do not feel good while you're doing it, but the goal is to not have to do it.
Yeah. I would second that.
So.
I've got one tip that I kind of found out over the years was a really good day to go out and pull garlic mustard is in the rain, because the ticks aren't crawling there. You get your rain suit and rubber boots and rubber gloves, and you can just be out. And, I'm not out in a thunderstorm if I'm lucky, but it's just really a pleasant time to be out in the woods for one thing. They're easy to pull and the ticks aren't crawling, so I find those are good.
She goes for walks when there's a blizzard happening too. Okay, guys, I think we're going to wrap it up here.